Thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Project Censored radio show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your co-host, Eleanor Goldfield, along with Mickey Huff. We're very glad right now to be joined by Thea Abu al-Haj, who's a professor of education at Barnard College, Columbia University, an anthropologist of education. Abu al-Haj's research explores questions about belonging, rights, citizenship, and education raised by globalization, transnational migration, and conflict. Funded by the Spencer Foundation, her current research, titled Disrupting Dispossession, Teaching Palestine in Exile 1970 to 1990, is an oral history project with Palestinian teachers in Lebanon. She is the author of several books, including Unsettled Belonging, Educating Palestinian American Youth After 9/11, an ethnographic account of young Palestinian Americans grappling with questions of belonging and citizenship in the wake of September 11th, 2001. Published by the University of Chicago Press in 2015, it won the 2016 American Educational Studies Association Critics' Choice Award. Thea, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. I hesitate to use that word, but it's great to have you here. I wish it wasn't to discuss something of this kind, but let's start with your specific experience. As you note, as you and your co-author Joe note in a recent essay in Inside Higher Ed, quote, the Harvard Educational Review was set to release a special issue this summer focusing on education and Palestine, commissioned in early 2024. The articles had been accepted, edited, and contracted. The special issue had already been promoted at major education conferences on the back cover of the spring issue of the Harvard Educational Review. But suddenly, Harvard pulled the plug, end quote. So can you expound on that plug pulling? What exactly happened here, and what reasons did Harvard Educational Review give you for pulling that plug?
Sure. So the Harvard Educational Review, which is like law reviews at Columbia and Harvard, a student led journal, and it's quite a well-known journal in education circles. So in March of 2024, in the wake of the beginning of the war on Gaza, the editors decided that they wanted to create a special issue to help the public understand both the historical and contemporary roots of what was going on in Gaza. And as you know, we all, I hope, know by now, even at that early time, at the time that they did this call, all of the universities in Gaza had been destroyed, and upward of 70% of schools had been either partially or completely destroyed. We're at a current moment where it's closer to 90% of schools. So Gazan students have been out of school at this point for over 2 years. So the editors, by invitation, called on a whole bunch of experts in various aspects of education in Palestine, and solicited research articles to talk about both historical and contemporary aspects and features of education in Palestine. And the range of articles is quite wide. So my colleagues Maria Abu Nasser and Joe Kelsey and I have a piece on our oral history project where we're looking at Palestinian teachers who and their political and civic actors in the movement, and their work through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the early 2000s. We have colleagues in Gaza who are talking about what's happening right now, and also how people are trying to provide higher ed in this context. We have there was an article on sort of what it means to teach about Palestine in the U.S. So there's really a wide range of research articles in this. Most of the articles were submitted for review by August of 2024, and then by at the end of 2024, early 2025, articles had been accepted for publication. We had all received contracts, after they had done some editing and requests for reviews. Most of the authors had signed contracts. As you said in the introduction, the issue had been promoted on the back issue of the spring journal. So with that, it's coming, and here are the articles. And what we didn't know was that there was starting to be a lot of behind the scenes political pressure on the student editors from the Harvard Educational Press or publishing, which is called the Harvard Educational Publishing Group. So in early May 2025, the Harvard Ed Press group informed the editors of the Harvard Educational Review that all the articles, they wanted to subject all of our articles to a legal risk assessment by Harvard's Office of General Counsel. It's, as you can imagine, it's like a super extraordinary move at that stage in publishing. It doesn't happen. I mean, I've been a publishing author for well over 20 years. I've never been asked to submit anything to any kind of legal review. And it was clearly driven by a fear of political backlash. And, the press appears to have been concerned that they might risk some legal backlash around sort of accusations of anti-Semitism. And that's what, even though, again, we cannot confirm this, that's what I was explicitly told by a faculty member and by student editors. That was the understanding. So the Harvard Educational Review editors contacted each of the authors by phone to tell us about this request for a legal review. And we found each other and we got organized and said, absolutely not. That this is really, to all of our minds, a form of censorship. I mean, what do the lawyers at Harvard actually know about research? We are the experts, right? We are the researchers. And so what does it mean to give the press some kind of risk assessment about this one's okay, that one's not, change this? I mean, we didn't even know what that would look like. It's, again, completely unprecedented. So we sent them a letter saying we will not subject our work to censorship. We see this as a form of censorship. And on 3 weeks later, on June 9th, we all got letters from the Harvard Educational Press that unilaterally canceling the entire issue and revoking our contracts. And in their letters to us, they cited very vague claims about copy editing issues, a disagreement between them and the student editors, a lack of internal alignment between the two. They told us that the copy editor had quit, and so they no longer had the capacity to copy edit. I mean, it's a very specious set of excuses. And they also did say in that letter that, of course, they didn't do a review, but they would be within their rights to do one for issues of defamation or illegal activity, et cetera. Now that, it is in our contracts that we attest that we have not done any of those things. But again, we have signed contracts. There's no, I mean, I can't even tell you, Eleanor, how unprecedented it is. Nobody has ever heard of this. And an entire issue, all 10 articles just canceled. So I think that's, and then the editorial board wrote a letter to us after that, completely rejecting the rationale that the press had given. And it's also the case that the Guardian did an article about this, and their investigation found that revealed that the press had actually tried to change the back cover of the spring issue to remove one of the articles that was sort of being advertised and replace it with another one. So there's a lot of unstated things happening. And I just think I need to be incredibly clear that the cancellation of an entire special issue violates the author's academic freedom, it violates freedom of expression and speech, and it really contributes to the Palestine exception. The Harvard chapter of the AAUP described it plainly as, quote, a textbook example of the killing of speech and academic inquiry related to Palestine. It's a new level to go after an entire journal and all this research.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's an attack on free speech. It's also an attack on history, on memory, on, the as Edward Said wrote, the permission to narrate. So it's an attack on all of those things. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, for listeners who aren't familiar with how these journals work, what kind of power do the students who run the journal have in terms of their ability to be like, this is absurd, because you said you got a letter from them saying what they said is just wrong. So what kind of power do they have? And has there ever been a moment where the student run press just says, yeah, that's ridiculous, we're going to do this anyway?
So I don't, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure I completely know the answer. I think the press gets to make the final decision. So I don't think I don't think they had the power to move forward and publish it anyway. We a year ago saw, or a year and a half ago, saw a very similar incident happen with the Columbia Law Review. And in fact, Rabia Aghbariya, who's one of the authors in this issue, um, was due to publish an article again that had been accepted and was supposed to be up on their website on Nakba as legal process, and the not the Columbia Law Review students, but the whatever the next layer up is for that, they actually shut down the website entirely to prevent the publication of his work. There was a lot of backlash against that, and it is my understanding, and I can't say this 100% for sure, but I'm fairly certain that the student editors all resigned at that moment, and then the website was put back up, and his article was published. So that that is that's where that was at. But again, these are, I can't emphasize enough, contracted, signed off, right? The contracts come from the press and from the students, right? The students didn't issue the contracts. I think the other thing I just want to say is that while I really do think there are fundamental free speech issues here, I also think there's another piece, which is the cancellation of academic research at a major research university. And it seems to me that the role of research universities is precisely to produce and disseminate research of like high quality in that comments on issues of, at least that some of which at least is commenting on issues of public concern. So again, at a moment when there are no schools or universities functioning in Gaza other than, again, due to the incredible steadfastness of Palestinians, like makeshift sites of learning, a press at a major university makes a decision to not disseminate kind of historical and contemporary knowledge that would help us actually think through what's happening now, what might be happening next. And I just can't emphasize enough that if universities are giving up their core mission, I don't know what they're doing anymore. Like, what are we doing if we are not doing core mission, which is to produce knowledge and research?
Yeah, and I do want to circle back to that in a minute, but I also wanted to ask you about the forces behind this cancellation. What do you know about the the nefarious movements behind the scenes that pushed either, the back cover to try to be changed, or indeed the entire this entire issue to be canceled? Because we've talked about this on the show, and indeed about Colombia as well, because that was a big story, particularly last year, because this isn't just a matter of like, oh, there's just a few Zionist administrators. This is a network of anti-Palestinian, pro-Zionist targeting of free speech and history and storytelling.
Yeah, I think these are really the big questions to ask. I mean, I can't say for sure uh, what is happening behind the scenes, what, but I think, again, you're right to point to this much larger process that's evolving in a large political context. Um, we know that it was not until uh, the Trump election, the beginning of 2025, that the student editors start getting some pushback from the press. The press was apparently, according to the students, quite on board with the project until then. So what changes in January 2025? Two things. One is Trump's inauguration, and the other is that Harvard settled an anti-Semitism lawsuit in which they adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. That's what we know. And so, and universities, Columbia, et cetera, are facing increasing pressure from the Trump administration. So I don't know. I can't say for sure how this affected things, but that it is, although I was told some of these things by, students and a faculty member, but it was that worry, that moment of that settlement of the anti-Semitism lawsuit with the adoption of IRA and, the increasing pressure from the Trump administration that sort of starts putting people on alert that they might be worried about the accusations. Harvard also took other steps that we know about. They dismissed the co-directors of the Center for Middle East Studies as an outcome of this settlement. Um, so the timing, maybe it's completely coincidental, but it's hard to believe that it's coincidental. And as you've covered on this podcast before, the IRA definition is very controversial, both because it equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism in effect, and it's kind of vague. It's not being clear about what kind of critique of the state of Israel it is, what gets captured in that kind of critique of the state of Israel that's apparently that is seen as fundamentally anti-Semitic. And as we know, also, it wasn't intended to be used in the way it's being used. We know that at least one of the authors had said this is not how he wanted to use it. So I think that's the political context. This is this censorship of this issue is a form of anticipatory compliance, right? And as you said, again, it falls into the erasure of conversations about Palestine, of this incredibly important topic, that the public cannot then have access to knowledge about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to talk a little bit about things that have happened since this was canceled. Earlier this month, in fact, a judge ruled that the Trump administration illegally froze more than $2 billion in research funding at Harvard, specifically over how officials handled alleged campus anti-Semitism. And indeed, last week here in lovely Maryland, civil rights groups announced a historic $100,000 settlement from University of Maryland for unlawfully suppressing pro-Palestinian speech. So I'm curious. This is good news, although it should never have gotten to this point. I'm curious what your thoughts are specifically on the Harvard ruling, because I'm assuming that Harvard was particularly, had its feathers ruffled over this $2 billion potential freeze. What are your thoughts on this ruling? And does this make you hopeful for how institutions will respond to these kind of threats or respond to accusations of anti-Semitism? Or are you kind of also feeling like you said, they're complying in advance anyway?
Well, I wish I were feeling super hopeful. We're at a moment where I'm actually worried, deeply and profoundly worried about the risks in the broader context. Harvard was being championed all through the spring as the one institution that was standing up to the Trump administration, unlike Columbia, unlike other institutions. And yet behind the scenes, they were doing all these other things. So it's kind of, I don't know. It's a hopeful thing that we have multiple judges saying no to the Trump administration agenda for universities, but the universities have been again, they have been complying in advance. We just at both Barnard and Columbia have just, between a federal sort of like an agreement with the federal government on Columbia's side of the road and a settlement of an anti-Semitism lawsuit on our side of the road. Both have just adopted IRA. Both sides of the road have made certain things that are definitely going to, in my opinion, chill speech. Agreements to not negotiate with student leaders of, pro-Palestine organizations. So then, if they're, in the midst of a demonstration, so then my question is, well, then what are we left with if the agreements are that they will not negotiate with them? Then is bringing the police onto campus the only option left for any kind of protest? So I am very concerned, and I think the other thing is that I think the public is mistaken if they think this is really all about Palestine. We are clearly seeing the constraints on education and on higher ed across the country. I don't know if you saw today, and so I don't have all the details, but there was a lecturer perhaps at Texas A&M who was just dismissed over teaching a LGBTQ in a children's literature class. And again, I haven't had time to watch the video yet, but a student brought a complaint against the content for their, as I understand it, for their religious beliefs. So, we have this situation where Title VI is trumping, and accusations of Title VI violations are trumping the mission of deliberation, conversation, dialogue about really critical educational knowledge. And the other thing is, I don't really understand why all of the universities have not at least tried the route of suing over these diktats rather than accepting them. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I mean, I want to dig into that because my father's a professor of history down in North Carolina, and at the beginning of every semester, he tells his students, "I hope I make you uncomfortable," because history is very uncomfortable, particularly his specialty, which is the history of the Southern United States. And I think, people are supposed to be uncomfortable when we talk about genocide. If you're not, I question your humanity. So if we're going to talk about history, if we're going to teach a history, then people are going to have to be uncomfortable. And we've also talked about, you mentioned the teacher talking about LGBTQ issues. We've also talked on the show about the issue of every, complaint that a student comes with ending in the dismissal of a professor, and really looking at whether this is something that we should that we should raise our hands and say, actually, I don't believe this is okay, regardless of whether the student is complaining about LGBTQ or something else that I might also find uncomfortable, but should it lead to the dismissal of a professor? And is this really, a matter of hate speech or what have you? And again, like you pointed out, these are places that are supposed to be open for debate, open for a push and pull of ideas and ideologies, of discussions. So then kind of sending this question back to you, what are these universities and colleges if they're not places where you can be made uncomfortable and have your beliefs questioned, have to discuss and debate and question your own ideologies and preconceived notions about the world?
Yeah, that is exactly the point. I mean, and I think, we could have a lot of conversation about, problems and limits of thinking about democracy and democratic education. But let's take this as an ideal. I mean, what is core to democratic education is precisely trying to develop a public, right? The university's missions used to be, or at least, I mean, I don't want to idealize the past. We've, especially sitting in a very elite institution that was incredibly exclusionary. But at its best, the notion is that we are in a space where deep exploration, curiosity, challenge, exactly what you're saying, challenging your taken for granted understandings of the world in conversation with research and knowledge, and talking to people who do not hold your views is the goal of creating a kind of educated public, who can uh, think through knowledge, to come to, you know, some kinds of actions and resolutions. Again, this is all ideal, and it comes with all the caveats of the elitism, the exclusionary environments, the et cetera. But at its best, that's the core mission of democratic education. If we're not doing that, what are we doing? Right? What is the point? Is it just so that people get out and get a job if they exist anymore? I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand. I think that colleges and universities are really losing their way. And I think they really have lost their way through this, um, since October 2023, when, again, these could be spaces where people were really leaning into thinking and educating about uh, what is happening in Palestine and Israel. And instead, there was so much shutting down of what can be said, what can't be said. I mean, we should be having debates about all of the terms that have been coming under attack. Um, you know, I mean, I know that public institutions are not held to First Amendment standards, but they should be. And the other thing is, as we know in the law, like, prior restraint is the worst kind of attack on First Amendment speech. So to not allow, lectures to go forward, to not allow research to be published, all those things, I would hope, and I have learned from, you know, responses to the work I do, right? So somebody says, I have a question about this. Then I get to ask questions of myself, of them, about that work. Core mission. And I think this is the last thing I'll say, but I think you really point to this important thing about, I think the mission of a classroom or a university is not for you to, if it's not to define safety as I never confront an idea that makes me uncomfortable. I think we can be very clear about what discrimination looks like, what it means to be targeted for your identity, and that's happening to all kinds of people all the time. That's really different than confronting a new way of looking at things, a new way of understanding how the world works, a different historical take. Those are really, we have to be able to parse those, and then not to use this Title VI legal route as the answer to every time anybody feels, potentially anytime anybody feels uncomfortable with content. And then we're back to lawyers and discrimination officers making decisions about what's happening in classrooms, what research is in areas that are not. I mean, it is my strong suspicion that Harvard's OGC do not know anything about education in Palestine. I could be wrong. I'd be happy to be wrong, but they are not the people to comment on that.
Right. It's like hospital administrators should not be the ones deciding whether you get surgery. It should be the doctor. It should be the experts that have studied this for years, which, of course, I feel like our education system and our healthcare system have a lot in common. The people making decisions are not the ones who are experts and should be making decisions. So, Thea, I wanted to ask you what happened with these pieces, these essays, these articles? Are they available somewhere else?
I think they are about to be. So, we are we have been trying to see it. I think I can say this because I think everybody's gotten reviews back, but Curriculum Inquiry, which is a journal out of the University of Toronto, is looking to publish this issue. So, and I believe to make it open access so that people should have, once it comes out in the near future, I think in the next month or so, people should have access to these articles.
Oh, that would be
I
wonderful.
can send you the link when that happens. So.
Yes, please do. Because the gatekeeping of academic information is another one of my the burrs in my
Yes.
but
Well, and so there's a way in which if as it looks, this might be open access for a couple months. This will be even like that. That's a really great outcome of a bad situation because Harvard Ed Review is not open access. So a lot of people will be able to see this.
yes, I love that. Well, I guess silver lining.
Yeah.
Thea, thank you so much for taking the
Thanks,
time to sit
Eleanor.
down with us and talk about this. And folks, keep an eye out for these essays and these articles that we hope will be out shortly. Thanks again.
Thanks, Eleanor.